that you have. So anything regarding that section, please feel free to open up that Q&A feature. You can type your questions there. If you're unfamiliar with the Q&A feature and would prefer to put them in the chat feature, that's fine as well, but the Q&A is there. All of our panelists will be able to see that, and I'll read out the questions at the end of each one. And I might repeat that as we go along if we get some more people that join us. So really quickly about SEAG, my name is Kaitlin. I am the program director for the Ventura County Child Wellness Initiative, one of SEAG's 4 education programs. We say 4, we have 3 core education programs for children, and then we have Ventura County Farm Day and Santa Barbara County Farm Day, which are our community-wide education events. So SEAG's mission is to educate students in the greater community about the farm origins of their food and agriculture's contribution to our nutritional well-being. So we really look at the journey of your food from the soil to the plate, the resources, the time, the labor that it takes to get there, and then what that nutritional value is for our body. We see about 10,000 students a year in Ventura County, and 60,000 plus students since 2008. And then our 3 core education programs pictured here is Farm Lab at Petty Ranch, which is our outdoor education program. We also have Ventura County Child Wellness Initiative, which is the program that I oversee, where we teach students about locally grown crops. And then STEAM careers in agriculture is for middle and high school students. And that's basically what SEAG does. And if you'd like any more information about SEAG, you can visit our website, social media, feel free to reach out. We're doing some online education things right now that we would love all of you to be a part of. In the chat feature to the whole group, I sent out a Google Doc. So if you could click on that Google Doc link at any time throughout the presentation, there are a number of links in there that will help you. There's some as we go through the presentation that are referenced, and you'll be able to see those as well. So that's in the chat feature. And then there's also a couple links for where to get some soil and soil amendments in the local Ventura County area. So today's lovely panelists, we have Meryl, Tova, and Kim, and Amira is with Tova as well. So these are their quick bios. I'll just read over them very quickly so you can get an understanding. But Meryl has owned an independent landscape management company for the last 15 years and has been on the Ventura County Resource Conservation District Board for 6 years. And she has a ton of hands-on experience planting and maintaining as organic of gardens as possible for her clients. And she's a great local resource for anything. So feel free to really use that Q&A section and ask questions. Tova has worked and volunteered in gardening and landscape for many years. She has her permaculture certification and a horticulture certification. And she loves to garden with her daughter Amira, who's with us as well. And they're going to be talking to us about one of the central topics of how to plant and really start a garden, as well as how to get kids in the garden. And then Kim is our master gardener, and she is also one of our educators out at SEAG's Farm Lab and a ton of other places. So she's educated children through the Abundant Table, Community Roots Garden, our Farm Lab, and the Santa Paula Agricultural Museum, as well as Hanson Agricultural Extension and Research Center. And she's been a certified master gardener since 2012. So we have a lot of great experience with us. The topics we're going to go over today, first Meryl is going to go over building a garden, then Tova is going to talk about planting a garden, and Kim is going to go over maintaining a garden. And again, at any point, if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A feature, and we will answer them as we go along. All right, and Meryl, if you'd like to take it away.
Yeah, do I need to unmute?
I just unmuted you. You're
okay,
good.
Great. Okay. Yeah. Hi, everybody. So here we are with our gardening hats on, which is the very first thing you do before you head out to build a garden. And I will be an essential, basic introduction to the 3 different ways of starting a garden. but I think that Tova and Kim have so much more information. So I'm going to kind of run through this and give you some pros and cons, but I'm sure at this point, if you're listening in and participating, then you are actually further along in the process than this. But the thing is about, there are 3 different ways, of course. In-ground gardens, as you can see, the pros are the fact that you don't have to build anything. You've got this right outside your door someplace. So of course, then it's also lower cost, and you already have the soil. You just need to amend it. And Kim is going to go into about composting and how amending just regular soil creates this really fertile medium. Of course, the cons are you're out in the open spaces unless you've built a fence around something, a place, an area. Animals can come and go freely. Snails come right out of the neighboring plants and move right on over and things. So this is just one of those things that when you plant in the ground in a garden is one of the things you just have to realize is going to be a part of the dynamic. Also, seeds tend to spread more quickly, so you'll probably have things, especially in the springtime, as you know now, grasses are popping up all over the place. And but the nice thing is with the weeding, you know, you get down close, you looking around, you have much more of an intimate knowledge of what's going on in your garden. And again, it's not necessarily more time, but you do end up having to usually create over time a much more fertile, rich soil than what you might begin with. Now moving on to the raised bed gardens, which, as you can see, this is a beautiful one, which has the fence around it. So this would keep out deer and hopefully the rabbits and all those sweet critters that are out there. And the gravel around, you don't necessarily have the gravel. That is another expensive component. And then you've got your raised beds. And I know several of you were concerned and interested in soil and how to fill these raised beds as inexpensively, yet still with quality soil as possible. I recommend the first year when you're just getting started. Oh, and also with the raised beds, I should probably go down the pros and cons here first. Okay, pros. Easier irrigation, because these are all set up, should be all set up with an irrigation line that can have a valve or something. That's a little bit harder, but of course it's also easier just to hand water with a raised bed. Again, easier pest control. And again, the nice thing is they're up a little bit higher, so you've got easier access. The cons, of course, cost of materials and labor, and they take some time to build. That's a major project, and more effort and cost to fill. So the filling part, what I like to do is put down as much straw as you can possibly put in there to begin with, and then put the soil on top. And now over time, this next year, it'll all start to compact, but at least it spreads that soil addition to your beds over time. And it's not one huge commitment financially to fill the beds with soil. And again, Kim will go into how you can take and create your own soil. And even if you end up mixing it in with other soils, at least then you have reduced your cost in, because that's your major, besides the lumber to build, your major financial commitment there. On to container beds. So containers, I love containers because they're so flexible. They're easy to start. You can start with any size. It kind of depends on what you're trying to grow. Little herb ones can be smaller, lettuce ones can be smaller, tomato ones can be one in a pot. And the wonderful thing is that you can move them around. Like it says, able to place in best area for sun or shade, for dappled shade. So you can move them around depending on which kind of vegetable you're growing. Of course, again, they're up You don't have the issues, especially with the snails and that kind of thing. You're easier to see what's going on with the plants. And again, you can either do it for irrigation, you can do a drip line, you can do hand watering. Again, I like hand watering because it gets me out into the garden on a regular basis, and you really can take while you're using the hose, you can check on things, you notice the pests that are starting to perhaps move in, or the mold starting to move onto things, and you get a much more, it helps you commune at the end of the day, or in the morning is even better to, you know, have that time to just do a little Zen watering. The cons, of course, is that some plants, like your corn or your, you know, that kind of thing, your larger vegetables need a larger space and don't do as well unless the container is absolutely huge in a container. And the difference, of course, is whether you're planting annual vegetables or whether you're then doing something that comes back every year, like the herbs are perfect for containers. Next one is fruit tree versus vegetables. So you can also do small fruit trees. I find that kumquats, lemons, your smaller trees do really well, and even long-term in a garden. And most importantly, with container gardens, as Kim will go into, is the ongoing fertilization and revitalization of the soil. That's on a regular basis, not to overstimulate, but to just keep that soil healthy, because again, that's the only soil that that plant is growing in, is in the container. So it's really important to kind of keep that going. I have on the resource page a couple of options for soil. Agramin, Peach Hill Soils is local with a yard off of the 118 in Somas and another one in Moore Park. Also, I go to AgRx, which they have multiple locations. The one I use is the one right on the corner as you're going into Somas from Camarillo. And they have, you know, lots of planting mix options, fertilizer options, pest control options, most more chemical oriented than organic. But that's where I buy a fertilizer that's I think it's a 555, and it's organic and it's easy to use, and it's but that's one of my go-to resources. So now I'm going to let, unless there are any questions.
I don't see any questions in the Q&A feature. Hopefully everybody has been able, if they have that open, to ask questions. As far as I know, everybody can see it. So we're gonna move on then to Tova and building a garden.
Hi guys, so we're going to be talking about starting seeds and seedling care, but the first thing that you're going to want to do is have a conversation with your kids about what fruits and vegetables they really enjoy. What kind of fruits and vegetables do you really like?
Asparagus.
Mm-hmm. Corn.
And artichoke.
Artichokes. She loves her really green vegetables, so we're going to try planting a lot of those. We might venture out, and since she likes corn so much, we might try that tricolor corn, just to try different things that they already know that they like. There's different varieties of cucumbers that you can get, little round ones, and so that kind of makes it fun and gets them to try new things. So once you've determined what kind of seeds that you're going to plant, then you're going to decide what you're going to plant them in. So we have a few options to share. First, you can buy little peat pellets. They're really inexpensive, and they're fun for kids because they end up, you add some water and then they pop up like this in just a few minutes. So they start out small and make it big. And then you can use things like that. And we have some other examples of little things that you can buy. These are some cocoa coir pots. You just fill it with a seed mixture. You want to pre-moisten that seed mixture first and then tamp it down. There's all different sizes too. You can also use little peat pots, and you can paint on them. That makes it fun. So here's some options to purchase, but you can also make them yourself. So she's made these little origami newspaper pots. They're a lot of fun, and there'll be a link to make those. So you can also upcycle, reuse old yogurt containers, little K-cups. There's all kinds of options to use for that. And we also suggest you want to label. So they start out kind of all looking the same. So labels really help keep track of what you have. And then a little date on the back for when you started. And this really helps with the documenting process. We also have a link for a journal. So she started this little nature journal. And so you can really document your observations of what you're finding, how long it takes for the seeds to germinate. So that makes it a lot of fun. So there's links to make those little newspaper pots, to make the journal. So that's a lot of fun. So the next step is for caring for your seedlings and what to look out for. So too much water and not enough water are going to be the enemies of your seedlings. So you're going to want to keep an eye on that. When the peat is wet or your soil mixture is wet, it's really dark. It'll start to lighten up when it's ready to be watered. At the beginning stages, you're going to want to water from the top, maybe just use a little spray bottle, and then towards the end, when you have more roots, you can water from the bottom, but never let them sit in water. You're going to want to drain that out. Appropriate seed size or seed pot size. You can get away with a slightly larger pot, but you're going to want to keep an eye on that watering and make sure that it dries out a bit before watering again. And then fertilizer, you're not going to want to do any fertilizer until you see about the second set of those true leaves, and add a quarter strength. Just keep in mind the beginning stages might feel like a lot of TLC, but gardens are resilient, and so there's just give and take with the gardens. So sometimes you can spend a lot of time checking things, and other times you're able to get away with not so much. And then when to plant your seedlings. So that's going to take about 4 to 6 weeks, sometimes 8 weeks, but you're going to really want to observe. You're not going to know until you really keep an eye and see the 3 or 4 true leaves. Then they'll be ready and you see some good root growth. And after that time, you're going to want to give them about a week to harden off. You'll put them in the garden bed, maybe slightly shaded, and give them about a week to harden off in the garden, and then they'll be ready to plant. Okay. And then to tickle roots or not to tickle the roots. That's a big question and debate in the garden world. And so if you see that your roots are really root bound, you're going to want to loosen them up a little bit before planting them. But if not, you just want to plant them directly in the ground. And again, label those plants. And then plant groupings. So this is the idea of planting in groups that complement one another. We're also going to include some links to give more examples on companion planting and different types of plants that do really well together. And companion planting increases the odds of higher yields. It repels pests and kind of lures those beneficial insects and pollinators into the garden. So one of the examples that's really fun that you can probably get away with in a very large pot or container garden are the 3 sisters, which are corn. You will grow corn. So this is a nice tall stalk, and then you will have plant beans. And those will there's a vining nature. They'll climb up the corn stalks, and they fix nitrogen into the soil, and you'll plant squash, and that'll act as like a living mulch and kind of shade out weeds. You can get away with putting all those 3 together. Some other ideas are planting marigolds with tomatoes. This is going to help repel the tomato worm. You may want to plant basil with your tomatoes as well. Cucumbers do really well with other beans, celery, corn, lettuce, dill. They really help each other out with that. And then the next one is getting the most out of your space. So you may want to use trellises. This is going to help your plants grow up instead of out, give you more room to plant more plants. You'll want to maybe check into square foot gardening, which is a fun way to really jam pack your garden beds. And also, you may not want to take the seed spacing as seriously as it says on the packet. You can usually squeeze a few more things in there. And succession planting, and this is just keeping your seedlings going. Always have a new set of new plants to plant in the garden. So when something's ready to harvest, you can just pull that out, eat it, and then plant something in its place. And you also may want to let plants bolt. And this is the idea of letting them flower and seed. This is going to increase your beneficial insects to come in the garden, and then also gives you an opportunity to collect seeds later. And I think Kim's going to talk more about that later as well. And then our last topic is getting kids in the garden. And so this is a really fun idea. Mira helped out with this a lot. She definitely suggests that make garden activities a game. This really helps them kind of take maybe a scientific approach and roll. And again, they can use their garden journal with different aspects of duties that they might be taking on in the garden. And it's easier for them to be inquisitive when they have things like gloves. So it kind of gives them some courage to just throw those gloves on and turn over those rocks and see what's going on underneath, what bugs and stuff are going on. They help with pulling weeds and so forth. It kind of gives them some courage. And so collecting seeds is fun, and collecting data and really take time to observe what's going on really helps make those connections, and helping with conducting little experiments and seeing what maybe seed method is working for you, maybe how you're watering, whether it's drip or you're hand watering. And journaling is just fun too. It just gives them time to just maybe just sit in the garden and just take time to just observe and see what calls to them and what their interests are. There's definitely something for every child in the garden. And so you're going to want to just kind of foster their innate interest already. And yes, so you want to grow those green thumbs for them. And so you also want to build continued connections to the garden. So you may want to see about maybe having a small compost bin or wormery. It does not have to be large. It can be very small or temporary. And this is just can continually get you out in the garden to check on things and spend time there. And if there are tasks that they seem unwilling to do, that's okay. Just let them maybe be in nature and just spend time. We shouldn't have too many expectations, and let them have some free play and free range time. And you never know what they're going to find. There's always continued connections in the garden. And I think that's it.
Amira, I don't know if you want to talk more about your garden journal.
You want to show some pages here? So we have links to some of the pages so you can start documenting what you see day by day for the seeds. And there's little areas where you can just draw or doodle, or you can, if there's pages where you can maybe make a poem in the garden. And we've also included a page to do like seed stamping. So you can do take little seed pods and paint them a bit and make your little stamps with what you find in the garden, leaves or seed pods, all kinds of stuff.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. I don't see any questions in the Q&A or in the chat. So I think we're going to move on to Kim, who's going to give us the Master Gardener look at how to maintain and harvest a garden and everything that goes along with it. So I'm going to let Kim take over. And myself, thank you so much, Tova and Amira.
Of course. Thank you.
Guys.
Can you see me? Okay, I'm unmuted.
And you're
all right. Okay, so I'm Kim here, and I'm going to talk a little bit about maintaining that garden that you just took all that time to figure out what kind of a bed you wanted to make and exactly what you wanted to grow in the garden, the seeds that you started or the plants that you've purchased. Maintaining a garden means you've got to be in the garden. And being in the garden daily is a very good thing. Matter of fact, when you're in the garden daily, you will see how plants grow, you will see pests, you will see how fruit ripens on the vine, all that type of thing. So it will really help you begin to understand your garden. And Amira's approach with a journal is absolutely a fabulous way to garden. If you write down what you plant and when, and different things that you've experienced, you will then again learn a whole lot, because gardening is an experience. It's an experiment. There is no judgment. Nothing is wrong. Nothing is rarely terribly wrong, but things could always be better. And so that's what we want to talk about, is how things can be better. So let's talk a little bit about pest control. Can we go to the next slide, Kaitlin?
Mhm.
So a term you're going to hear about pest control is integrated pest management. That means nothing more than using your whole toolbox of things that are available to deal with the pests that could bother you. When you know that you have a pest problem, the most important thing to do is identify that pest. That being said, that may not be easy, but you need to try and figure out, does it come at night? Does it come during the day? What do the holes look like? Probably the most important thing to ask yourself is it causing superficial damage? Or is it causing damage to your plant that's going to be catastrophic, as in taking food out of your mouth? That will help you understand the type of treatment that you need to actually do in terms of your pest once you've done the identification. Through the Master Gardener program, I got a lot of training from the University of California Cooperative Extension, so I will refer to their websites, the UC IPM website, for you to help understand ways to identify pests. But it's the scientific approach. But here what I thought I'd do is just show you a few general things, almost generic things that I've done to handle pests, and maybe those can be useful for you. So perhaps the most important thing is using a resource that's local. I'm from Kansas, and one of the things that I was taught early on is that, by golly, potatoes needed to be in the ground on March 17th. That's not true here. So again, local information is going to be your best help in terms of dealing with pests. Okay, so in the bottom left-hand corner of the photos in front of you is a number, so I might refer to that to talk about that particular photo. So in the first one, I wanted to make pesto, a lot of pesto. So I had got this beautiful basil plant and I stuck it in the ground. The next morning I came out and looked at it. It's been eaten. Well, that's catastrophic on a basil plant because you need to eat those leaves. I happen to know that those, because of the way it's eaten, and because it happened at night, that those were probably pincher bugs. And I also know that a way that I've dealt with pincher bugs in the past is, you can see in the bottom of that photo and in photo number 2, you can bury a lid or a small container at ground level, a little bit above ground level, and put oil in it, just cooking oil. I buy cheap cooking oil. And the pincher bugs will get in there and they will drown. And that's a way to help you control pincher bugs. Does it get rid of all of them? Absolutely not, but it will help with that. You can also use beer. My dogs drank the beer. They leave the oil alone, so I use oil. In picture number 1, that's the first night of putting it in the ground, so I have just a few little bugs in there. The second one is after the second night. I think I caught a few pincher bugs. You'll also notice that a lot of them are small, so that tells me about the life cycle that that pest is in. It's the smaller version, so they're very voracious right now. It's been about 3 weeks since I started doing that, and the populations have gone way, way, way down. In photo number 3, another one of the generic things that you can do for pests. See that white stuff in the bottom? That's diatomaceous earth. Diatomaceous earth is just a natural occurring substance that has little sharp points on it that could hurt soft-bodied insects. It won't hurt you and I, but it can slice a slug so that that slug won't get into your garden. So that's a good thing. It won't stop pincher bugs because they're hard-shelled, right? So you have to think about that. But diatomaceous earth is an option. It slowly dissolves. And a con about it, when you water away the diatomaceous earth, you have to reapply it. So being in your garden daily, again, is very important. Second thing in that picture that you can see is you can kind of see some chicken wire over the top. That's a cloak, C-L-O-C-H-E, or just a covering that you can make or buy it, like I did in this case, to keep out certain sizes of pests. it's effective to keep birds out. Think about swallowtail butterflies. They're absolutely gorgeous. I love seeing them. But what do? They lay eggs on parsley. It's their favorite place to lay their eggs. And what happens when the eggs hatch and we have our larvae crawling around? They eat every stitch of the parsley. Swallowtail butterflies can't get through a cloak typically. And so you might actually save your parsley plant. Another thing that you'll see in that picture is that at the bottom of the basil plant, I've taken a black pot that I purchased a plant in, cut the bottom out of it and stuck it around the basil. Again, just to protect it. Hopefully it will keep some type of insect away, some type of pest away. So again, another easy solution that you can bring to bear when you're dealing with pests and you're not quite sure what. Can we see the next slide, Kaitlin? And as Tova mentioned earlier, through companion plantings and things like that, marigolds are a wonderful thing to plant in the garden because they're a beautiful pop of color, but they also will repel lots of pests. Can't really see it in this picture, but pincher bugs love marigolds as well. So this is a pretty sad looking marigold, but it's actually the one out of the 6-pack that survived. The second picture there, onions and garlic. We know that those are pretty smelly things, right? Well, some insects don't like them. So planting onions and garlic can also help keep some insects and pests away from you. I was once told that if I planted garlic around the edge of my garden, that I wouldn't have any problems with gophers. I think that's wrong. I believe it helps repel some, but with gophers, gopher wire is your only answer there, I'm afraid. And you have to tack that gopher wire down well because any tiny little hole they will get through. So you've got the companion planting approach or planting something that will repel. And it's really nice in a garden to see things intermixed. These types of plants allow you to do that. Next slide, please. So sometimes your very best way to deal with insects is those fingers. Pinch those bugs off the plant. Is it gross? Yeah, wear some gloves. But it is oftentimes the best way to get rid of cucumber beetles. It just depends upon your pest. You have to deal with it. What about those aphids? Sometimes aphids are all over your kale, and you're not going to eat kale with little black bugs crawling all over it. Well, a blast of water will work. But where do the aphids go when you blast that water? Probably onto the ground. And what will happen? They will crawl back up. So you may have to blast the water frequently. But be aware, aphids love high humidity. You're creating high humidity for them. So you're creating an attraction for them, even though you're getting rid of them. So it's just some things to be aware of. Experience is going to be your best teacher. Aphids detest high heat, dry high heat. So we'll have them till about right now, maybe a little bit longer. You don't plant your plants too close together. It's going to have better air circulation, less likelihood of having aphids. So you'll learn what pests do and don't like. So you can also squirt a little bit of soapy water on something. You take a bottle of water and add a couple of drops of dish soap. All the dish soap is a surfactant. It just creates a slick surface, so to speak, or something that doesn't taste so great for some insects. But again, it has to be reapplied frequently. Kind of like, I don't know if I mentioned on the diatomaceous earth that when you water, you have to reapply the diatomaceous earth. That same type of thing. That's why you've got to be in your garden daily. You can always resort to a chemical type of an approach, but think about it. That chemical is not going to probably be selective and want to kill just the insect that you're after considering as a pest. And think about it also, that insect might be in its life cycle where it's a pest and beautiful when it's bigger, like the swallowtail butterfly. Swallowtail butterfly is gorgeous, does wonderful things to help us pollinate. But when it lays its eggs and the eggs hatch into larvae, they're voracious, they eat everything in sight. But then they pupate and they turn into another swallowtail butterfly. Hundreds of them. What do you want? No butterflies? Or you want to lose a parsley plant? You have to think about some things that you might have to give up. Chemicals, if you're going to use them, read the label. they'll tell you the time of day, the life cycle of plant, where it's safe to apply, all those types of things. There's lots of things you can do before you have to resort to chemicals, because again, think about it, they're no more effective unless applied perfectly than your diatomaceous earth or your soapy water or your oil. So there's just lots of different ways to approach pest control. Another simple way is photo number 7, and 8 shows it actually in place. Bird netting. You can put bird netting over top of things. That works real well to keep out a myriad of pests. However, what are the cons? Lizards get stuck in your bird netting. Birds get stuck in your bird netting. Snakes get stuck in your bird netting. So again, you have to be in your garden daily to save those poor little guys, because those little guys are very beneficial to you. They didn't want to get stuck in the bird netting. Next slide, please. So I had mentioned, as a master gardener, the training was offered by the University of California and the Cooperative Extension, and it was very science-based. And the University of California has created a website called UCIPM. This is a picture of it. And if you want help identifying pests or how to treat pests, this is a very good site to make use of. I believe in the chat boxes you've put these links, Kaitlin, I think that's what you said, so you can see that information. The Master Gardener Helpline is also available to you, and if you call that number or email that address, people like me volunteer on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, and we use the UCIPM website to help identify pests and hopefully figure out some issues to help people in the garden. Additionally, we have the resources of the farm advisors, who are the PhDs that are employed by the county to support our local ag industry. These are some people that are incredibly knowledgeable and will help us find solutions to things that we just may not be aware of. Next slide, please. So pest control is one thing that you have to do in maintaining the garden. So we talked about that briefly. You also have to water. Watering has a lot of options as well. So what are you going to water? That's the first thing. Well, where's the water needed? If you look at the plants on the right-hand side of that slide, do you think the leaves need the water? The answer is it's the roots. The roots need the water. As a matter of fact, when you water the leaves, things like aphids like to come. So you need to be aware as best as possible to try and water the roots of the plant. When do you want to water? Well, you want to water morning or evening. It's just logical. You want to avoid evaporation. And how much do you want to water? Well, look at the sizes of the roots of the plants on the opposite side there. The one on the far left is a seedling like Tova was speaking about, and it just has a single little root down there. It's just getting started, but it's oh so fragile. And if that root goes away, that plant cannot survive, because that's where it gets everything it needs to be alive, except for the photosynthesis that's starting at the very top where it's got that green leaf showing. The other plants are in different stages of growth, and you'll see the lettuce on the far right has the largest set of roots. So he probably needs a little bit more water than the other ones do. There are tools that you can buy. We like to buy things. There are tools that you can buy that might help you with watering. There is a moisture meter that you can get at a nursery, probably $8. And it's a probe that you stick in the ground and it'll say wet or dry. And that means that that soil at the point that you stuck it in is wet or dry. Now, were you close to the root where the water mattered, or were you far away? So it's one of those things that may or may not be a helpful tool. It might just make you feel better, and that's a good thing in and of itself. Some people will use a chopstick because you can see the difference in the color in the unfinished chopsticks, not painted chopsticks. And perhaps your best tool is your finger. Just like pulling off the pest, use your finger and stick it in the ground to understand the amount of water that you might actually need for a plant. Next slide. So we've watered it, we took care of our pests, so now we can actually harvest. And a harvest doesn't mean you're going to pick it all and it's all going to go away. There's ways to harvest to actually increase the production of your vegetables. Leafy vegetables, see the picture on the left there? That's arugula. Picture on the right is kale, obviously. And if you pick something like arugula at its base, you got to leave some green there. It's kind of like a lettuce. You can cut it and come again, and it will grow again, and it's wonderful. It will keep producing for you. The kale on the right, if you can see the leaf structure, the stem runs right along the side of the text box. You cut the lower leaves off first. You don't cut off the top leaves because that's where the new growth is coming from. Again, just logical things. You think about how a plant grows, particularly when it comes to something like bolting. Bolting is when a plant begins to set seed. So think about that plant. What is that plant's job? That plant's job is to grow from a root to a stem, to grow leaves, to grow flowers that turn into fruit, and to set seeds. Setting seed, it's to reproduce. So that's what that plant wants to accomplish. So if you can stop that cycle anywhere in the middle of it, that plant will reproduce more of whatever it is that you probably want. So in the case of bolting, again, Tova talked about collecting seeds. You might want to let it go. So something like cilantro go to seed. However, you can pick the fatter portion of one of the fatter stems. That's typically where you will see the bolting begin, because it's fattening itself up. It's getting ready to create new seeds, so it gets rather chunky, and you can chop it off there, and then you might have more growth coming from that cilantro plant. And the same thing applies with harvesting. Think about that plant's growth cycle and what it wants to do. It wants to reproduce. Reproduction in plants is to create seeds. So say you pick strawberries. You pick the strawberries off the plant. You will encourage more production because the fruits disappeared. The plant doesn't have the opportunity to create seeds, and it thinks it has to do more because, again, reproduction is what that plant wants to do. Next slide. One quick thing, I wanted to talk about compost. Perfect. And I don't know if we have that slide, Kaitlin. Were we able to do a slide? Okay.
No.
All right. So compost, before I ask if there's any questions. Compost is a really interesting thing. Remember how I talked about pincher bugs in my garden? I made my raised beds of straw bales. I thought that was the most environmentally sound way to do it. Well, guess what? It was environmentally sound because it decomposed. Guess who decomposers are? Pincher bugs. Exactly. So I created, in a sense, the situation that I have. So you have to be aware of what that insect that's your pest is. What's its job in the garden? What's it supposed to be doing, and how's it supposed to be helping you? Well, compost becomes compost because of decomposers. Compost is nothing more than returning to the earth what came from the earth. So that means you don't compost a plastic bag, but you can compost a piece of cardboard because it's been minimally processed. It's got color on it, probably not so great. But again, anything minimally processed can be returned to the earth. You can do anything from a simple pile, and in my case, what I do is in my chicken coop, I've created an area with pallets where I throw my compost, where I throw table scraps, where I throw greens that I might have trimmed off the lavender plants, and I can tear up paper and cardboard boxes and things like that and throw that there. And I just let it decompose over time because I'm too lazy to continually turn it. I let my chickens do whatever turning is necessary. And then I will go in at the bottom of that compost pile and dig out soil whenever I want any. And that works fine for me. There's much more complex ways to do it. You can do bins and have a sequence of bins where you are moving your compost from the very big size that you start to the small size. Think about that. When you compost something, you might compost, say, an apple. that apple needs to decompose. If you put a whole apple in a compost pile, it's got to break down the skin and then get to the inside and go through it. The skin is there on purpose to keep it from decomposing. So you have to think about what you're throwing into the compost pile as to how fast it will work. But that also tells you, you start out with something big, maybe a big hunk of wheats that don't have seeds on them, and you're going to put that in your compost pile, and then you might over time move it to smaller bins if you've got smaller pieces. Compost is nothing more than decomposition. And again, think of who comes at decomposition. All the guys like worms, all the guys like pincher bugs. Some of them we love, some of them we're not so sure, but they are all there to do their job. Another type of composting could be tumblers, compost tumblers, or you could deal with vermiculture and actually set up worm bins. As complex as you want to make it, know that something like compost tumblers takes more maintenance because you have to keep it wet, you have to turn it. You can't keep adding stuff all the time. You have to let it set for a period of time to make soil before you can add more to it. It depends on your needs as to what you want to accomplish. Something that I've done that gets to the making soil question that Meryl mentioned earlier is a professor that I took classes on soil with talked to me about how instead of throwing out his cardboard and his paper, he ripped it up in small pieces, soaked it in water, dug a furrow, and buried it. And that would help him rehab different areas of his garden. It's magnificent because who comes? The decomposers. I can dig almost anywhere on my property and find worms from where I've actually buried the paper. It's really a good thing. But again, think, in Southern California, if you bury something in the middle of summer, what's going to happen? Well, it's going to take a longer time for it to decompose for sure. If you plant it if you bury it in the fall with all the rains coming through, it really helps it break down lovely because compost is nothing more than decomposition. I think that answers the questions about compost. Just one quick thing about compost versus mulch. Compost is something that is added into the soil. Mulch goes on top the soil. Mulch is usually big pieces like wood chips. You could do straw, things like that. But think of what the mulch that you're putting down, if it's straw, what will happen to that? That'll break down faster because it's smaller pieces and it will attract decomposers. Do you want decomposers right at the base of your plant? You have to think about it. You may, and it may be just fine. So be aware. Compost is something you mix into the soil and mulch is something you put on top. Okay, Kaitlin?
Awesome. So I don't see any questions, but I think what I'm going to do is I can allow our attendees to talk. So I'm going to press those allow to talk buttons. And if anybody has any questions that weren't answered throughout, love for you to be able to ask them. So bear with me and we're going to see how this works. So CF, I'm going to do allow to talk. And so it'll automatically mute you. So you'll have to unmute yourself. But I'm going to press allow to talk for everybody here so that if you'd like, we can have a conversation. I don't know if they're here with us, but somebody did have a question about avocado trees and whether they should be losing leaves, and then also how to keep some seedlings alive. So if anybody wants to unmute themselves and ask a question, now is your time. You can take it away. Any questions? No questions?
Maybe Kaitlin, to answer that avocado question in particular, can Kim address that?
Sure. Kim, do you have an answer for that?
Well, thanks, Meryl. It depends. Yes, avocado trees can lose their leaves. Anybody loses their leaves. What causes something to lose its leaves? Probably it's getting stressed. What does a leaf do on a plant? A leaf on a plant does something called photosynthesis, which creates the food, which allows the plant to grow. So losing the leaves, all the leaves, is not a good thing. Losing a few leaves is probably not a problem. If you go to that UCIPM website, you can look at avocado trees and diseases of avocado trees, and it might give you some answers there. You could call the Master Gardener Helpline if you have more. If you have a picture, that's really helpful. It's hard to just answer, to give you the exact answer, and I don't want to say something that could be very wrong. But if you go look at that website, they will show diseases of avocados, and they will address some of the options. In general, when plants are stressed, they will lose leaves. That typically happens in the summertime when they are water stressed. They can also lose leaves if it's a seasonal thing. Avocados, I'm not terribly well versed in, but I would assume unless it loses all leaves, it will be fine. Sometimes my leaves disappear on my plants because my chickens eat them. And you know what? As long as they don't get that top leaf in the center, I'm okay. It will probably grow back. You just, again, be aware of how that plant grows. If anything takes care of the root, gets rid of the root, or if anything happens to the very top, you've got problems. You may not have a live plant.
I found too that when a tree is in production, sometimes then all the energy is going towards the fruit production, and it tends to get a little light in a leaf canopy, right? So,
absolutely. Could lose then too. You're absolutely correct. This is avocado flowering season. So I wouldn't think you'd be dropping leaves right now, but I don't, again, can't speak to it without knowing more. And Kaitlin, what was the other question?
The other question was how to keep some seedlings alive. So I believe the specific seedlings were, let me grab that question. It was with the greenhouse, I have trouble getting lettuce and carrot seedlings to survive. Is there any recommendations on how to keep? A couple of my seedlings, I didn't ever see any bugs on them, but it was like they just wilted and it looked like something ate away at it, but it wasn't something visible that I could see. And I even brought them inside and it continued to happen. So maybe some advice on those how to toughen up some seedlings or what to do to keep them alive.
Well, one of the things that can happen very easily is a dampening off of a seedling, and that can occur because of fungus in the soil. When you're growing things from seed, cleanliness is really important. If you use a pot that had a different plant in it and you didn't clean it after it, and that plant had some kind of a root disease, which there's a lot of root diseases here, then that could be passed on to the new seedling. One thing that I've done is sometimes people overwater seedlings. Tova, I think you spoke to that. You can overwater them so easily. Something that I did for seedlings, just because I didn't have the greenhouse and want to set up the irrigation and all that type of thing, I took a broiler pan, you know how it's got the bottom and then the top, and I stuck a towel underneath at the bottom of the broiler pan and then put the grill piece on top, but then I pulled the towel up over the top of the pan so that I could fill water at the bottom, and the towel would wick the moisture up, and then I set my seedlings on that, and that provided them the moisture that they needed to keep growing. Don't ever try and start a seedling in full sun. Not a good idea. It dries out too fast. And if you've got, Kaitlin, if somebody was eating your seedlings, and you might want to, watch them for a while, see if it's happening at night or during the day. You got to protect those little guys. You'll have to cover them.
the other thing that happened, the other thing that happened to me, and with city or treated water systems, it's not such a problem, but I'm up in the county area and on a small water district, and the water is hard. It's a harder kind of water. And I was told that creates a coating around the seeds and makes it harder for them to germinate. So that just FYI is out. I know where you are, you're on wells, and that might be another component to the difficulty. Seeds are really, you have to, that's why they put a lot of seeds in those packets.
Yeah, that is very true.
That's also why some is to buy plants, because seeds can be so finicky.
Yeah, I might be at that point to just buy plants. I'm having
Yeah,
problems
I do both. I mean,
Right.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to ask.
Okay. And maybe Tova and Amira can speak to this about which seedlings you found have been easiest. I know radishes pop up like, and are basically indestructible. But what other seeds have you found that are easier to propagate?
Radishes are quick. We practically have a forest of cilantro going on right now. So you have these beautiful flowers that are going to continually reseed. So that's pretty easy. Parsley tends to be somewhat easy. Basil can be pretty easy. Chives are super easy. Tomatoes, it's probably best. We like to get them as little startlings. It takes a bit of time for those tomatoes. Corn is pretty easy. Cucumbers can be pretty easy.
Wow.
Yeah, squash.
Tova, do you want to talk about when you get a tomato seedling and how you should plant it? Because most people don't realize how
Deep. Yes, so when you get those tall stalks of tomato seedlings, you'll notice that the main stem is really fuzzy. So you're going to want to actually dig your hole kind of deep and maybe bury it a few inches of that stem. And that's going to really create, those little hairs are beginning stages of roots. So that's just going to really increase the root structure. The more roots that you have, the more tomatoes that you'll have, and get that water up through the plant.
Yeah, I actually do it to the first, almost to the first set of leaves.
Okay, yes.
It's great advice.
and if you want to, if you take off that first set of leaves and bury it under that, you've got a real sound root that'll grow out of there again. So yeah, there's lots of things. Tomatoes are very forgiving that way. And real quickly, Tova asked me to talk about tickling roots. If I buy a plant, I will take that plant and very gently raise it up out of its pot and see if its roots are root bound. If so, I won't buy it. Or if the roots are brown, that means they aren't healthy. You have to be very gentle when you do it, but it's a way to get around not having to tickle roots. Most plants are pretty forgiving if they have quite a few roots. If it's a root that has to go straight down like a carrot, he's not so forgiving. And somebody like a Matilla hot poppy, which obviously isn't a gardening plant for a vegetable, you touch a Matilla hot poppy's roots and it will not grow. It will not. So you've got to be very, very careful, and you will learn from experience whose roots don't mind being tickled a little bit. I grew up buying being taught to buy root bound, and then snipping the roots, if you can believe that, and vertically and sticking it in the ground. Guess what? It worked. So again, as I said, when you garden, there's not many things that are wrong. There's just things that are a lot better.
Yeah.
Great. Well, if nobody else has any questions, if you do, feel free to unmute yourselves or type them in the chat. But thank you so much for coming.